So he looked at me and he said, "What do you see the world in?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "What focal length do you see the world in?" And I thought it was like some esoteric question. He's like, "No, man, think of the image. Bring the camera up to your face. What lens is that? That's the lens. That's the focal length you see the world in." And to this day, I'd not known what it was until I put that lens on the camera, GF50, walked around, and I put it up. I'm like, "Oh, this is how I see the world. This is so great." Yeah. So
What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD Newsroom with Mino Leitner and Johnny Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Welcome to this episode of CineD Focus Check, our weekly podcast. I'm here with Johnny, like every week, almost every week.
Hi guys, still in Japan, having great time in the, it's very hot, it's very humid, but it's Japan, so never complain.
All right, and we have a special guest this week here in Vienna with us, which is equally humid weather, I guess. It's Victor Ha from Fujifilm US. You're the Vice President of Electronic Imaging Division and Optical Devices Division. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got that right. Yeah.
It's very nice to have you here. Thank you for coming on spontaneously. We went to a nice lunch yesterday, and then I was like, "Oh, do you want to, spoil more of your vacation with us and come in for the podcast today?"
Yeah, I like spending time with you guys. And it's nice to kind of see where you guys work and play, and I always like talking about this kind of stuff too. So it's fun for me.
And I love to hear, honestly, that you are listening to the podcast, and you are not just saying that because you were actually saying things, talking about things that we talked about in the podcast. So you were not just saying this to be nice.
Oh, nice. It's so I find that, working in imaging and working with cameras and lenses, it's really hard on a day-to-day basis to stay up to speed. And so you have to choose some of your media sources. And when I found that your podcast was not just covering new equipment, but providing as kind of a neutral opinion as possible, but some opinions, that was really exciting for me because it helped me kind of gut check what my opinions were on new releases. And it's a really good way to keep up with the industry because sometimes I just can't read through all of the articles and even with all the magazines that get sent to me, I can't go through all of them, because that's just time. But when I'm in the car or when I'm on the train or on an airplane, it's just nice to be able to listen. It's good.
Perfect. Nice to hear that people are actually watching and listening to it. Yeah. No, honestly, I mean, that was the intention. And also just to get a bit of a bird eyes view on the news, because I mean, news can get boring at times, and it's just the new camera, whether, it doesn't matter if it's an amazing piece of equipment, but I think we're more interested in the general, where is everything heading? Where is the market heading? What are the things that are around the corner in terms of technology on a broader level for imaging? Because I think so many things are changing, and I think the podcast is one of the things that gives us a chance to do that and actually have the conversations that we otherwise wouldn't probably have the time for in a public setting in a way.
Yeah, it was funny. When we were leaving lunch yesterday, I was speaking with Jackie and Kevin, and it's funny because I think that was the first time we'd had a conversation that wasn't like, "Hey, how's it going? Hey, good, you well? You said, okay, bye, see you." Because whenever we go to a trade show, it's like, "Hi, hey, what's up? Okay, good, okay, bye." Yeah, and that's it. So it was nice to have a conversation and to learn about your boys and to understand kind of what you are going through in life and, about the neighborhood. And it kind of helped contextualize everything for me, which is kind of neat. You don't get a chance to do that a whole lot.
That's very true. I mean, trade shows by their nature are just about the gear.
Yeah.
Sorry, Johnny?
But part of it is really the pace of Vienna. Vienna is obviously much slower than the West Coast or New York. So everything, suddenly life looks a bit different.
Yeah, for sure. You know what? But the trains are always on time. Like, always on time?
You see, when you come from the US, you think they're always in time. When you come from Japan, you think they're never in time.
It's crazy.
But you know what's funny? Statistically, Swiss trains are even more on time, but I read why.
Why?
They simply leave more room for adjustments.
Oh, that's funny.
So they're smart about it.
Yeah.
So literally is like, like they kind of
Under promise, over deliver.
Exactly. So that's the way to do it. Anyway, let's move to imaging actually. And as I said,
it's not a podcast. It's not a podcast about trains.
Trains.
Today. What's going on?
probably half of the people already switched off, but no, let's talk about those broader things. And,
Sure.
and we don't want to really to loom too much on individual products this time. I mean, we'll mention them and their impact, but I think we are really interested more about a general feeling that you are getting about where the market is heading, where the whole industry is heading, because of course, with current technological and societal developments, a lot of things are changing. And one of the major things sorry, Tony?
No, it's okay. Sorry.
One of the major things we wanted to tackle is the fact that, well, obviously for Fujifilm, I mean, you've just recently had this massive success with the X100VI, which I think after the X100, correct me if I'm wrong, X105 is one of the most popular cameras that we've seen in any recent history in terms of like how many people want that thing and have to wait for a long time. Yeah. And we're just, like discussing internally, why is that? Why is that thing something that so many people want?
I've been asked this question a lot over the past 6 months, especially since we released X100VI. And I think a lot of it has to do with luck and timing, but I also think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that the camera has gone through 5 generations. So at the time that we were lucky, had the luck to have good timing, we had a camera that was relatable, we had a camera that was attractive, and a camera that I think met some of the needs that a broader audience kind of wanted to latch onto. I think what we're seeing is when I was growing up and buying cameras and wanting to be a photographer, I self-identified as a photographer. And when I wanted to start a business, back in my early 20s, I self-identified as a professional photographer. And I think as we look outward and from the point of maybe a couple years ago until present day, I think that many people don't self-identify as photographers or filmmakers or cinematographers or videographers. And I think that a lot of people want to make high quality images. And sometimes they want to have those images because they are an artist or a chef or a different profession or something that requires high quality imaging, because we are now in a world where no matter what profession you're in, you do need a level of image quality that could exceed what you can get with a phone.
But do you see a lot of people who are using this camera? Have they been using cameras before, or are a lot of them new to photography and video making?
Well, I think that what we see is that a large number of the individuals who have purchased the camera are new to our brand, new to Fujifilm, which is exciting. And traditionally, X100 cameras have always been a camera that people who have other brands or are purchasing as well. And so there's a lot of cross intersection of users there. And I think the success of the camera has indicated to us that the customer group has expanded quite a bit, into first-time buyers, into first-time users, into first-time camera owners, The trend of, I would say, compact cameras to premium compact cameras, the trend of purchasing used ones has kind of been noticeable in the US. And so it didn't surprise us that at some point a premium compact camera like X100VI would be brought into that equation as well. So I think, again, we are victims of good timing, a great product, great engineers, and really a good evolution to the point where as we came out with a new product, it hit at the right point in time too. So it was all good things for us.
Victor, 2 quick questions. One is, how long does it take to develop such a camera? In general, cameras in general. I mean, it used to be quite a long time, but now the pace looks so much faster. How long does it take to develop a camera?
Well, I think each camera model specifically is different. So when we think about how long it takes to develop a new camera. I think from an engineering standpoint, you can say that a processor and a sensor take X amount of months, right? Or X amount of years. I think when you think about features, those features can be discussed as, far back as 10 years ago, right? The discussion of IBIS, for example, in our first XT camera, that discussion started years before it ever was possible. And I think as you look at some features, those discussion of those features kind of start and stop based upon the conversations that we have with our customers. I think Fujifilm has had a really great reputation on providing tools that are responses to feedback that has been given by the market. And so even though there are requests for specific features or requests for new features, I think we try to balance it with a response to what our customers want and what's possible technologically.
And my second question is, because you mentioned you being a photographer, just that our audience get to know you a little bit better. Next to marketing, you are also a photographer. You are literally, that's what you did for profession?
Yeah, back in the day, like when I was like graduating college, so I graduated with a degree in theater, and I realized as I was graduating that I wasn't going to be very good at it. So I picked the next best thing, which is photography. So clearly I'm Asian. So can you imagine me telling my mom that, oh, Mom, it's fine. I'm not going to do theater. I'm going to do photography instead. And this is at like my graduation dinner, right? And so she was so happy about me not being an actor that when I told her that it was photography, she said, can you make money with that? And I said, yeah, sure. I'm making money already. And that's when I started actually doing photos for weddings and, headshots and that kind of thing. And that lasted until I was around 24 or 25. And then I found myself moving to a company called NIC Software. And NIC Software, a long time ago, they did Photoshop plugins.
I remember them.
Of course.
Yeah, and I worked for them for about 5 years, and then left and went to another company, stayed there 10 years, and then came to Fujifilm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you miss professional photography, or you think it's?
Okay. All right. So I did love it, but I found myself just being really good at copying other people, right? And so it was like, I got to be honest, right? So I would see an image and I go, oh, I can do that. And then I would do it, but like slightly change it. And it would be like my image then. So I felt like I wasn't original, well, and after.
What's the saying? Bad artists copy, great artists steal.
Yeah. So, so evidently I stole really well, because I lived in San Diego at the time and it was fun. And I had a great business that I was building, but I realized I was getting stagnant. And I wasn't as good of an image maker as I thought I could be, and then it became very stressful for me, and I wanted to do something different than this pursuit of being good at something and then being so good at it that you become great at it. That's became like a real life purpose for me. And then I started moving more towards business and more towards marketing, more towards understanding those types of things. And that's when I started to get really originally creative, and that's where my background in imaging kind of started to help out a lot more.
Nice.
Very cool. I just want to circle back for a second to the X106 because it's just interesting to me. So I still, I understand why people like it and why it's popular, but I still can't understand why it's as popular as it is. I mean, it is a sexy camera. It feels like don't get me wrong, like a poor man's Leica. It's just nice to hold. It's nice to work with. But it's a complete outlier in an industry which is in general more on the shrinking side. I mean, with some exceptions, but if you look at the past 10 years, it's been tough. I mean, especially for those entry-level cameras. And I don't know if we can call it an entry-level camera, but it's certainly not a high-end mirrorless or DSLR camera. So what's your take on this? Why? I mean, you said maybe you can talk a little bit about the demographic that you think this camera is using, and you mentioned that there are new people coming to the brand. Why is Fujifilm good at this with this camera where, like we don't have any compact cameras anymore. They don't exist anymore, right? Like if you remember like what was out there, is it like in the old days when you went to an electronics store, the bulk of cameras you saw were compact cameras. They just do not exist anymore because everybody moved to smartphones. And then we recently talked about that on one of the recent episodes that the recent numbers seem to indicate that people move towards more expensive cameras now, where there's a little bit of an uptick there. I think 20% more are sold. But the X106 is not one of those. I mean, I guess it's not one of those more expensive cameras. So it's I don't know. It's an outlier, right?
So I think that camera is special because it's a combination of aesthetic, design, tactileness. I think what we're seeing is a trend towards photographers or image makers. Let's just call them image makers for now. But image makers are moving towards this desire to have dedicated devices.
I think the fashionable thing would be to say creators.
Yes. and I think I had that conversation with a couple of professionals, and they said, "Don't you dare call me a creator." So it's kind of like they're image makers, storytellers, But I think what we're seeing is that people are now moving towards this idea of a dedicated device because it's not that it's more creative, but it's more isolated. It's isolating. You want to be able to spend a set, unstructured amount of time looking through either a viewfinder or engaging with a device that's not going to pop up a notification and tell you your mom wants you to come home for dinner.
Is that a generational thing?
I think so. I think it's purely generational because when I saw the first iPhone, God, I'm that old. Yeah, so when I got the first iPhone, it was like so exciting to have email and text and web and a camera all in one device, right? And we were hungry for these apps that treated the phone like a camera, and we were so hungry for the fact that the phone could switch from still to video so quickly and that it was HD quality, right?
Although it wasn't that quickly on the original iPhone, to be fair.
It was fast. It was fast compared to a camera, right? True. Yeah. So like, I remember we were looking at cameras that had just had HD video functionality put into them, and then we were looking at iPhones that had apps that did more than that, and so we started to gravitate towards these devices, and I think that what ended up happening was screen sizes started getting bigger, battery life became important, more touch-sensitive apps started kind of becoming a requirement. But then we saw that functionality start to shift over into cameras as well, where you start to see touch screens and you start to see some of the transferable skills get moved over to our cameras, or just to cameras in general. The pinch and squeeze, for example, to zoom in. When you do playback. Yeah, so I think the move towards dedicated device is a generational thing because we have always had the luxury of knowing what a dedicated device is like. So it's easy for us to move back to it. And we do know what it's like to have multiple functionality on a single device. And so, being kind of at the age group that you and I are at, the being able to flip back and forth where we were analog and digital and analog, it makes sense to us. But I think newer generations who haven't had that experience, who haven't had the ability just to go out and not worry about if their camera is connected or their phone is connected, but just that they're making images. I mean, I think that's why I think film is also becoming a sought-after medium as well, because there's an element of curiosity and surprise there. Okay, there's an element of time sensitivity, meaning it's not going to be completed until you send it somewhere or until you have it developed, right? There's a lack of immediate gratification. The delay of gratification, I think, is something that I think is becoming more tangible for a lot of people. I think that's really neat. It's good.
it's funny you touched on, interesting you touched on how some functions of the smartphone moved over to cameras. But in general, I mean, Johnny and I have had this conversation a lot, again and again, also on the podcast, where I feel like cameras in general, like the physical camera, how it is now with all its buttons and screens and stuff, hasn't really changed a lot over the last 15 years. I mean, look at the 5D Mark II from Canon, and then look at the latest mirrorless camera. I mean, the mirror has disappeared, but other than that, I mean, very often they're black boxes. We are very similar shape, very similar form. Now you can use the touch screen, but you can still use the buttons. But the menus look the same. They haven't really, been copied or imitated with what the smartphones do. And also, I feel like I'm just always a bit confused where a lot of manufacturers see losing a lot of business to the smartphone because those cameras keep getting better. And as they say, the best camera is always the one you have on you, and the one that you always have on you is the smartphone in general. And then, of course, you have the big tech companies being able to pour billions of dollars just into camera development, whereas the biggest camera manufacturers together even, like it's not even a competition in terms of like, of course they have the downside of this tiny sensor and so on, but still computational photography, cinematography and all those things are starting to make a dent also in higher end cameras. But we talk about on-device functionality. I'm surprised that we still don't see any mirrorless cameras or cinema cameras that have on-device image processing, on-device image editing, actually. Something that Samsung tried, that Zeiss tried, and both failed with their attempts at mirrorless cameras, having Android as an operating system and Lightroom there to actually edit your raw photos right on the device. And then maybe the missing link would be a 5G connection, just to go straight to Instagram or wherever people want to post something without actually having to tether to your phone and so on. Well, what's your take on this? Why hasn't this happened? Or is this just in my head and not something that people would actually use? But I feel like it could be extremely popular.
Well, I think let's breaking up the statement into a few different kind of question and answers is, I think one of the biggest technological developments that we have had in the last 15 years has been the removal of the mirror box, right? Moving from a DSLR format into mirrorless is still fairly a recent thing. And we can see that in the landscape of cameras that are still available today, DSLR style cameras are still being offered, especially at the entry level markets, right? So I don't even think that we're through the transition of removing mirror box. And that single development, technologically speaking, has allowed for some of the greatest advancements in imaging technology in the past decade. Going from standard sensors to BSI sensors, then to stacked sensors, and to other ways that we can make more use of the digital signal that is being recorded by the sensors. Those are some of the most incredible advancements in technology. And I think as camera manufacturers, that's what our job is to do, is to produce the best image possible and to give that image a fighting chance when it's being put up against other devices that can potentially do similar things, okay? So from a camera manufacturer standpoint, our job is to produce an image and to do it on a range of imaging sizes that can be utilized for both an entry-level market as well as a professional market. So I think if we think about what that mission is, when you look at on-device editing, I mean, I'm using a GFX on this trip. I've been on the road on vacation now for 3 weeks. Okay, I've made more images in the last 3 weeks of my life than I've made in the last 3 years, just because I'm just steeped in some of the most beautiful places in the world right now. And the thought of having to edit on my camera makes me sick. Because one, I believe that the JPEGs coming off of my camera are the best in the business, right? I believe that Fujifilm color science out of camera requires no need for any kind of editing. And if I do need to, export a raw file from camera, I can do so, and I can push and pull and make a film simulation. So in effect, like, we do have on-device editing. I think what I want to do, though, is see these images in large and to dive into them, and really the ones that I love the most, spend time building my style into it, right? Like on this trip, I can do everything from, use X app or download to my phone. And I think what we want to do is to provide our users different ways to get the image off the camera. And I think that's evolved in the last handful of years as well, right? With camera to cloud, with direct transfer, with the updates to X app. Do I think it could get better? I mean, yeah, of course. Of course it can get better. But our first mission is to provide the best image quality possible. And I think to this day, the only way to get the best image possible is to use a real lens, to use physics, to leverage the optics, the sensor, the processor, the image science. And when you look at the full package, I mean, there's only a handful of companies in the world that can do that. And thankfully, we are one of them.
Great.
Let's continue and talk about innovation, because we are diving into this subject. And you are one of the people to really push hard in Fujifilm the whole topic of camera to cloud. Now, when you look kind of backward, I mean, you just started with a few cameras, of course, but is it up to your expectations? Like how the creators, we decided on creators before, how the creators are actually adopting this type of technology?
Slight correction is I wasn't the primary person that pushed camera to cloud. I think there was a team effort there. I just happened to be the person that was talking back and forth a lot with the team in Adobe, and they were really great partners. But yeah, nothing would have happened without the full team involved. And I think from an adoption standpoint, I think we're very pleased with how it's been adopted, and we're continually seeing growth with this adoption. We're continually seeing more users try the service and figure out how to make it work. And interestingly enough, I thought that we would see a lot of predominantly video users, but we're seeing a lot of video and photography users being trying the platform, right? And I think as we move forward, all of our cameras being currently 5th generation cameras being compatible with Frame.io is something that we're excited about too, because it gives a lot of our users who have used our cameras without Frame.io to try it. And I think as we look forward and other camera companies start to provide their own version or a connection into Frame.io, I think that's only going to make the direct to cloud model more of a viable way to get media and our files to post more easily. I think that it's important for us to look at acquisition as not a singular thing that one camera company is responsible for. I think acquisition is a responsibility for all camera companies to be able to allow the users to use any variety of tools to get their files to post more seamlessly. Because as we start to continue to move forward in especially a media landscape that requires so much content in a shorter amount of turnaround, the ability for us to acquire and deliver direct to cloud is a necessity, not just for Fujifilm users. I think for all users. We know at the entry level as well as at the highest levels.
Let's take a quick break and here's a message from our sponsors.
Welcome to 1 Minute Tips by Fujifilm and CineD. Let's talk a little bit about video compression. You might have seen terms like long GOP and intraframe come up when selecting different codecs within your camera, but what do these mean? Long GOP works by using complete visual data from one frame, a keyframe, to estimate visual data for a group of frames, or group of photos, GOP. The result is a much smaller file, but sacrifices the quality of fast-moving sequences. The second, intraframe, sometimes listed as all I or intra, records and compresses each individual frame. This yields a bigger file size, but will preserve more detail within a sequence regardless of motion. So, Which one is right for you? Well, if space is not an issue, then Intraframe can provide better quality and can work faster within your editor software. However, if you're looking to save on space and aren't planning on filming any fast motion, then long GOP will likely suffice. Check out our other videos where we'll dive into more properties of video codecs. This has been 1 Minute Tips. Until next time.
Film Convert is a software company based in New Zealand that creates color grading and correction plugins so you can enhance your artistry. With their two plugins, Film Convert Nitrate and Cinematch, you can take the stress out of any color correction or grading task. Both plugins work their unique camera packs as the team profiles each specific camera and its sensor that's supported. This means that the controls within the plugin are tailored to the specific camera brand, model, and profile that your footage was shot with. While we all love shooting on film, the process and cost of actually shooting film can get quite exorbitant. However, you can get the dreamy and romantic look of celluloid film with Film Convert Nitrate. Nitrate offers a range of different film stock emulations and grain sizes to choose from, each with customizable controls that you can really dial in your desired look. Choose from one of Nitrate's motion picture, black and white or still stock emulations and a range of different grain scans to get the authentic look and feel of film. You can get 10% off Film Convert Nitrate when you use the code CineD at checkout. And now back to the show. I think it's a very good point. I think I would go even further that there needs to be other players in the industry to promoting this, because my experience is as a shooter that very often the camera crew is aware of the possibilities, but it's never the camera crew to decide on what's happening with the with acquired images. And so many production companies are just used to doing it the way it's always been done, or they're just simply not aware that this is an option. I know so many productions that would hugely benefit and that would from a camera to cloud workflow, but they're simply not aware of the fact of how well it works.
Yeah.
And just having, somebody needs to show them in a way. And I think the camera companies will have a hard time showing them because the production companies are not really connected to the camera companies. So, almost even like giving workshops to them through a producers organization or something like that is something that could be hugely beneficial. I mean, and as you said, there's more and more productions where this fast turnaround is something that needs to happen. Very often, social media content needs to go out right after it's being shot. And I still, you end up being on a set where everything is super organized. You have tons of people for everything, and you haven't even thought about using camera to cloud. And it's like, this is the most obvious thing for you guys. Yeah. There's still somebody, a PA, that needs to run the cards across, I don't know, a racetrack or, something like that. And whereas this would be so useful, they just didn't know about it. And that's the fun part. I mean, the weird part.
Well, I think, and this is technology, right? So at the point where technology begins to be adopted, I think camera to cloud, we're still on that upward trajectory. We are on still that upward trajectory of early adopter. And the early adopters are the ones who are going to solve the technological issues, the connectivity stuff, Wi-Fi. I think if you think about commercial production, I call it sub-Hollywood to Hollywood, okay? And in sub-Hollywood productions where, you have very capable, very well-skilled, very highly trained professionals on set doing commercials. To use camera to cloud, now you need an on-set network tech. And to think of needing an on-set network tech where they can troubleshoot the connectivity, they can troubleshoot the Wi-Fi on set, they can now have to manage all of the competing radio signals on set, right? That's the challenge of the future.
But that brings me back to what I mentioned before. Why don't we see 5G in cameras? Like an eSIM built into the camera. Is that something that's hard to do, or? Well,
I think that's just a symptom of the problem. Okay, so we've all been to NAB, right? We've all have 5Gs on our phone, right? Have you tried sending a text from the floor from a phone? Does it ever get through? No. So part of the issue isn't just putting 5G into a camera. I think the larger issue is how we deal with the interference and the organization of the 5G signals. And I think that starts at the telecom level. And Fujifilm, last I checked, is an imaging company. We're not telecom, right? So I think there's a conversation that has to happen abroad across the entire industry that involves first an understanding of the network and how it can be divided, and then go from there.
That's a good moment to mention that we battle tested your camera to cloud workflow at NAB, and we have a very nice documentary behind the scenes that how that worked. So for anybody who missed that, we'll put the link in the show notes.
Cool.
What is 15 minutes or something on how we work with that. But we were facing, of course, those issues. It's. I mean, to be fair, a technology trade show is probably worst place where you can test something like that, because there's so much Wi-Fi congestion.
But then we're also trying to solve. We're also trying to use that solution to solve things like sports journalism, right? At the at the Super Bowl, or at the World Cup, or at the Olympics, and so you're going to hit those challenges anywhere you go. And I think that, sure, if at some point cameras have 5G eSIMs, sure. But that has to come with a broader solution that we are, unfortunately, have no control over, and I think there's hope, there's a future there, but I don't know in what is it time scale. Yeah.
Victor, we are talking to some storage manufacturers, and some of them are actually telling us, we discussed before how long it takes to develop a camera, and they are telling us that in the long run, internal slot, like a card slot, is not even on the roadmap of camera manufacturers. That means somebody is already thinking about recording directly to the cloud. What is your opinion about, let's leave aside if it's currently possible or not, but your opinion about this type of development? Do you think it's beneficial, or hard copy is always better?
I think that's an unfair question to ask me because I'm so old now, right?
But that's coming from an older person, so you can answer.
So I don't know what the future roadmap entails related to memory. And if I did, I still wouldn't be able to talk about it. But I think if I speak from the perspective of a professional and the perspective of an individual who worked with image makers every day, is I think that it would require a lot for me as a professional to not have removable media in my devices. Because I was always taught that I need to walk with at least a backup, right? In some way, shape, or form. And I was taught that physical backup is one of the most certain ways of making sure that I don't lose my images, and I think, if we think about image makers today, and let's go back to when film moved to digital, okay? When film moved to digital, the adoption rate was really, really slow because so many photographers were so afraid of what would happen to the files, and so afraid of what would happen to their images, because at least, and I heard this a lot, at least with film, I have my negatives. And if I wanted them digitally, I could scan them, right? So I think in order for us to look at the possibility of removing media or making media internal in cameras, I think we have to really navigate the conversations that we're going to need to have with professionals in the field. And remember that they are the ones that are going to need to adopt the technology. And that's what the first question I would ask myself is, are we willing to have that conversation, and are we willing to deal with the pushback?
I completely agree with you. It's I have the same take. I just think about how we are treating movies. Mm-hmm. Like how we used to buy DVDs, Blu-rays, and now I used to be collecting those things, right? And now out of convenience, I still have them, but my Blu-ray player isn't even connected to my TV anymore. Yeah. Because when I want to watch one of those things, I just look on the streaming platforms if it's there. And out of convenience. And, it might be down to the actual speed, and it's maybe something we can't even imagine yet. But if it is, like Johnny is indicating, in the future possible to record 4K, even 10-bit video, whatever, directly, quote unquote, to the cloud, and people get used to that, because there will be devices that are doing that just out of the box, and probably smartphones or whatever we use then will be the first thing. It's a convenience thing, right? Because then there's this illusion, and it really is just an illusion, that anything that's on the internet is there forever, which we know is not true. I mean, downloaded videos in my YouTube Premium account disappear if somebody deletes that video. Or purchased movies from your iTunes library disappear if they don't sell them anymore. But it might be something that we have to face, because out of convenience, people might just do that. Maybe not on a professional level, but I think we're closer to that point than we think. That those, and I think it's probably it's really the next generation of mobile cellular connections that's going to enable that. The Internet of Things, everything is connected individually, and then you're just used to having everything in the cloud and not carrying any storage anymore.
I think that if we're going to have a conversation about consumer versus professional, then we need to bifurcate the topics and the answers, right? If I look at the professional landscape, we can point to things that has happened at the highest professional levels, like, for example, going from HD to 4K. The pain of going from HD to 4K on a streaming service and the infrastructure that was needed to get to 4K, I think it would be very difficult for us to expect the same level of effort to get to 8K streaming, right? That's just just to see what we all had to go through on the consumer end as well as on the provider end to get to 4K. I think the thought of removing media and making media direct to cloud, that's a massive lift on the professional front because of the needs for bandwidth, the reliability, the redundancy, the on-set networking person. Like there is a whole host of things that I think we have to really take into consideration before that becomes a viable, reliable solution on set. And then you think about all of the productions that are on location. And then let's stop for a second and go into virtual production now, right? Where now everything is digital. The thought of having to push everything to cloud without physical media almost is a hindrance, right? Because what happens when the power goes out? What happens when the internet goes out? What happens when a cable goes out? And so I think these are all considerations. Do I have the understanding fully of what is the best solution? No, I don't. But I think that it's always important to kind of see where you can push technology and see how we can create a solution that gets files to the cloud, but still allows us to have a physical copy for those that need it, right? Because I think sometimes in some cases, taking a file from a card can be easier than getting it from the cloud. And taking a file through a cable when you don't have a reader is easier than pulling the card. So I think as manufacturers, we have to understand that there must be different ways to get the file from the camera, not just one. So,
okay, Victor, let's meet again, same time, same place, 5 years from now, and discuss the same topic. It will be interesting just to discuss. But I want to ask something different because it's a good opportunity. You are, as you said, ex-photographer, and Fujifilm is making APS-C next to large format cameras. As a photographer, what is your personal preferences? Do you like, what do you like working or shooting, or just as a hobby, doesn't matter, to take pictures with large format or APS-C camera?
So before this trip, I would be carrying either an XT50 or similar compact size camera. And, I do it because I live in New York and I'm already, carrying a lot of stuff usually. So it's nice to have a smaller camera. It's very compact, very lightweight. And, I'm a small camera lens kind of guy. On this trip, I started August 1st, and I've been on vacation since August 1st, and I've been using GFX 100 S2 almost exclusively. And I've been using that camera with GF50 f3.5. And for this week, I switched to GF80 f1.7. So I've used 2 lenses with that camera. And I've found that carrying that camera on a trip of a lifetime like this, right? Because I don't know when I'm going to have this much time to travel Europe, to be with, my friends and that kind of stuff, to make images. And I found that using GFX, even as like a street camera, has been so satisfying. So satisfying, right? Being able to see the images, and I've shared some with Johnny. I've shared some with some of my friends, and it's really given me a deep love for that camera. I did not think that camera could be a street photographer's camera. I did not think that it could be a camera that you could bring out, and because for me, I'm such a small guy, and carrying that camera, if I pull the camera up, the camera's the size of my head, right? So you can see when I'm taking a picture or making an image, and I cannot be inconspicuous with it, but the images coming off of that camera are just so beautiful.
Are you feeling like those old-time photographers 100 years ago, like being the full format, like just putting the thing over your head?
Yeah, so now now I'm doing this weird thing too, where now I keep the camera at my stomach and I flip the screen out and I just waist level it.
That's so weird that's the Hasselblad move.
Yeah,
the original Hasselblad cameras with the mirror.
Right. So now it's like waist level, and I use my thumb to use the shutter, and okay, so when it's at my stomach, now I've got the perspective of a third grader, because I'm 5'6" or 5'7", and so when it's at my stomach, it's 3 feet high now. So it's kind of really cool. So it's changed the way that I make images, because with XT50, even if I've got it up here, it looks so small. It's not even intimidating. But you put a GFX camera up to your face, and all of a sudden everyone's like, camera, So I think it's a lot more challenging. It's a lot more fun, and I found that. I see the world in GF50. That lens is the way. So a long time ago, I was having a conversation with a professor at RIT, which is the Rochester Institute of Technology, and his name is Professor Dubois. So he looked at me and he said, "What do you see the world in?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "What focal length do you see the world in?" And I thought it was some esoteric question. He's like, "No, man, think of the image. Bring the camera up to your face. What lens is that? That's the lens. That's the focal length you see the world in." And to this day, I'd not known what it was until I put that lens on the camera. GF50, walked around, and I put it up. I'm like, "Oh, this is how I see the world. This is so great." Yeah, so.
Very cool. Yeah, so, I mean, I want to see this podcast in the GFX 100 look, so maybe you can upgrade us.
Yeah. Victor, but we, Nino kind of roughly mentioned Hasselblad, and we are talking about large format photography and filming. Hasselblad is actually owned by DJI, and currently it looks as if Fujifilm is dominating the large format arena, the market. But DJI has this kind of thing of coming up unexpectedly with new devices in a very attractive prices, and usually those things are really working well. I mean, you are sitting with us as a Fujifilm representative, but are you guys kind of looking left and right just to make sure that you have enough ammunition to continue to lead this market? Or what will happen suddenly if DJI will come up with something very attractive?
That's an interesting question. I think that we are always paying attention to what the market wants. And I think that Fujifilm has been very successful as a brand by looking at the needs and wants of their customers. Of course, we always pay attention to what other competitors are doing, but sometimes it's hard enough to stay focused on the things that we need to do. We have great systems in X series. We have great systems in GFX. I think we are growing a customer base and an audience of people that use our cameras for both video and photo. And I think that some of the exciting things that we continually see our audience make with our current tools is really inspiring. To be honest, I hope that our competition come out with tools that challenge our tools. I believe that our tools will always win in the end because we've got great fans. We have great image science. We have great color, great optics. We have a history with our broadcast and cinema lenses that allow us to be on the world's most incredible film sets. And so I'm really excited about what the future is going to have for our brand. And the industry needs to grow, right? The industry needs to make bigger and better projects and bigger and better tools. And I think we are part of that industry as Fujifilm. And so the challenge is upon us to make better imaging tools and better science and better optics. And so I think as a collective, we would be silly to say that we don't want competition. I think as a collective, we need the competition because the only thing that makes us better is, at the end of the day, the images and videos and stories that we watch. And because that's what's going to inspire younger generations to make something, right? That's what's going to inspire someone to pick up a camera and make a photograph. And so I think for us, that's all good. We want to have a vibrant and strong industry, because without it, this podcast and my career and my friends' roles as filmmakers and directors, those kind of go away. No one wants that.
I think because you mentioned it briefly, the different types of products that Fujifilm and Fujinon make. I think the choice of products that you guys make is very interesting because you don't do everything. Mm-hmm. And you're one of the few ones that don't try to do everything. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I always found it interesting that you guys are Super 35 or APS-C. We don't do any full frame, what we call full frame now, cameras, which arguably has really entered, like the cinema market in the last 5 years. Like every other manufacturer has moved not only their mirrorless, but also their cinema cameras into this full frame field, and then the lenses followed and everything. And you guys completely kind of ignored that, and then, also, but advanced the APS-C field and also advanced the medium format or large format. It's medium format in photography, which is kind of the same thing as large format in cinematography, always confusing to people who are not from the industry. So what's the thinking behind that? What's the thinking about this, like you kind of serving those two ends? And also in lenses, the Fujinon lenses, many of those are very high end, very much for the high end cinema and documentary, whatever, but like very often used with non-Fujifilm cameras, much higher end cinema cameras. So it's a very eclectic, interesting mix of products that you guys are making. And what's the strategy behind that?
Well, I can't get into the specifics of the strategy, but I can get into the specifics of the products and the thought behind products like Duvo, for example. Duvo is a newer line of broadcast lenses that we have recently come out with, 14 to 100, 24 to 300, and 25 to 1000. And they're a set of lenses that allow an operator to use them on Super 35 as well as large format. Okay, and those, it's got a built-in expander. It's kind of designed for multicam live cinema production. Those lenses are, and I think that's a really good example of us addressing the needs of the market. Okay. If you look at the current production landscape and you look at like live production, if you have seen recently, I think the Taylor Swift era's film, if you've watched the Beyonce film, if you've watched any of the live concert production stuff, Duvo is on those productions. In some cases, 625 to 1,000 lenses. Those lenses are upwards of $200,000 US. Are on those productions. And so those productions and that lens, again, came at the right time And large format into the live production space also came at the right time. But also now we're kind of seeing, again, another shift where it's like, is it going to be large format or is it Alexa 35, right? So in that discussion, I think us having a lens that caters to both is the right move, was the right move. And a credit to the team, a credit to the marketing team and the optics team in the US, collaborating with the team in Japan and collaborating with our colleagues in Europe to really get the right data in place to make those lenses, right? And so I think, again, those lenses would not have come into existence had we not listened to the customer. We have wonderful relationships with operators. We have wonderful relationships with truck companies and OB companies and rental houses. And they're the ones that say, hey, you guys should really take a look at these things right now because there's a gap in the system and we need to service that gap and we don't have anyone to service it, right? And so here, that was a huge example.
So here's a difficult question because you're talking about listening to customers. We spoke about NAB. I want to try to connect everything together. Last NAB, we saw some rental companies that are actually rigging the GFX 102 to become kind of a cinema camera. And the nice thing for us at CineD was to actually see that Fujifilm is kind of pushing and endorsing those companies. I mean, actually, they were exhibiting their product in your booth, which was really, really nice. My question is, do you see, I mean, it's becoming a very crowded market. So many companies are actually showing cinema cameras. Do you think there is more for one more company to show something like this? Or what is your take on this crowded market?
I don't know that I have enough battlefield vision, okay, to properly answer that question. I think if we look at the camera landscape on the video production side, and if let's like even narrow the focus more into something like professional production, okay, I'm constantly being told by cinematographers that they want to be able to pick tools that get the job done. And they don't want to align themselves with any camera manufacturer specifically because that would limit them from getting the best image and telling the best story. So from that perspective, I think that crowded is synonymous with choices. Okay, so I think that if we are going to look at the perspective of a DP and a cinematographer and a storyteller, they need choices. And I think that if they want choices, then it's the responsibility of a camera manufacturer to listen to what the market wants and decide if they want to be one of those choices. I think today we have great choices, right? Today we have great options for individuals that want to use our tools to tell stories. And hopefully we will continue to be able to provide those same cinematographers with choices, And so I think that, it's great to see what Old Flash Glass did. They did an incredible job in providing cinematographers with a choice, right? And they've got a wonderful collection of rehoused vintage glass that would work great on that choice. And I think that it's exciting for us to see that there's an interest growing for that specific choice. I think it's exciting for us to see that people are excited about that, But yeah, it's a different conversation when you get into that kind of user group, right? And that customer base. And we're happy to see that specific version of it was well received.
To anybody who hasn't seen that interview, Johnny did a nice interview with the guys behind Old Fast Glass. What was the camera called? So they basically did the GFX 102.
Yeah, they called it like an OFG 65 or something.
Yeah, so they rehoused it kind of, and we did a video interview about that at NAB. I will put the link to that video in the show notes.
Yeah, those guys are really, really great guys. Mark's awesome. They did that entirely on their own. We didn't even know about it until, right before the show. And just so that we can clear the air here, they showed up at NAB and kind of just sat in our booth, and we just thought it was a great idea that they sat in our booth. It wasn't
cool.
like a prearranged thing, but it was nice to have them there. It was great to see what they had done with the camera. Our colleagues from Japan really did get a chance to see it and understand kind of the problems that they solve with it. So it was cool.
Yeah, very nice to give them the open arms of your booth and actually allow them to kind of exhibit.
Please make a note that for the next NAB we have to come up with something and just come to the Fujifilm booth and just sit there. Hopefully they will host us.
What can we put the camera in? Yeah.
No, we did get some grief from the show organizers though. So please don't do that.
Oh yeah, with other brand. We know that. We had our own booth. It's like, you're not allowed to have another brand on your booth.
Yeah. Please.
Of course, they want to make money. Good. Do we have any last questions, Johnny?
Just two questions. One is, there is a slowdown in our industry. We can't neglect it. Do you see this type of slowdown also affecting the camera manufacturers? Do you have any concerns about this?
So the slowdown that we're currently experiencing in the U.S. Has happened, I guess, over the past year and a half since the writer strike, and that's affected high-end production. It's affected a lot of different scripted productions and even commercial, down to kind of even the brand supported commercial stuff. It's affected the higher professional levels for sure. I think that we're seeing the impact kind of slide over into photographic professionals as well. I think your average run-of-the-mill wedding photographer or portrait photographer that makes and lives their livelihood off of that profession, I think probably didn't experience as much of an impact depending upon the market that they lived in the U.S. I'm speaking specifically about the U.S. So I think there's some impact market-wide. We've seen it across the board, especially in the high-end professional areas. We are starting to see it come back. We're starting to see more productions. I think the fall time, we're starting to see more traction on production spinning up, rental agreements getting signed. So there's a lot of hope that we're going to move into the fall production time at a higher clip as an industry than we've had recently. That's exciting for us. I think we're going to hopefully see that trend continue through after the holiday break. And then we're really going to see what happens kind of in the springtime. But then if you look at things like live production, we saw the Olympics and we saw, the Copa Cup and the Europe Cup, right? So the live production in sports continues to be a churning system that wasn't necessarily so impacted by some of the things that we saw in Hollywood. And so I think depending upon which market segment you look at, you'll see different answers. And depending upon which side of the business, whether it's like, broadcast, cinema, or photo, you'll see a difference. I think it's had a massive impact, generally speaking, but some people were affected more than others.
And my last question is, it's actually, that's about the other end. We just talked about professionals, but I think that many of the young generation, they kind of lost respect to the profession. I mean, this is so easy to take pictures and videos those days. And I remember in the old days when you would come with a camera, people would kind of look at you and say, wow, he probably is doing something very special. And of course, this is okay. I'm very much in favor of the younger generation doing a lot of stuff. But do you see a way to keep the simplicity of taking pictures and video, but also in a way to restore the the respect for the profession itself?
That's an entirely different podcast topic, to be honest. I think.
See you next week. No, just kidding.
Yeah,
Next
so,
year.
so that's a really interesting question, because I think we deal with that as just a marketing team in the U.S., right? Because we don't want to alienate anyone that wants to make an image or tell a story. Okay, that's the goal is to have someone use an imaging device to tell a story. Because if they're not using an imaging device to tell a story, then there's no possible way that they're ever going to use one of our cameras to tell a story. Okay, so I think when you look at the different segments in the market, and you look at some individuals that have less of a focus on the craft, or less of a focus on pricing, or less of a focus on the business economics of how to run a sustainable operation, I think those are all contributing factors to what you're talking about, right? I think education is really important, especially if there is a creative individual. I don't care how old they are. I don't care who they are. If they're making great stuff, but they're charging too little for it, that's going to affect all of us, right? The industry from the manufacturer side to the content creator side. If they don't know how to sustainably quote out or bid, or understand copyright or trademark, or understand how to write a proper agreement, and to really put that in, if they don't understand the need for insurance and how to bill for all of that, then that's our problem. That's our problem. We have to fix that as an industry. We have to train and educate and teach them those things, right? Like in the US, we have organizations that are dedicated to helping professionals understand how to run sustainable businesses. Like on the photography side, we have the ASMP, for example, and they provide legal services, legal counsel. They provide contract services for people who want to learn that, because it's important for media professionals to learn a craft, but also run a business. And I think that those younger creatives, they're doing it because they love it. I think it's our job to show them what things they need to do to be able to continue doing the thing they love, so that they can make it a sustainable thing for them in their future. And that's where I think we have a lot of work to do as an industry, because that's something that I'm passionate about, is making sure that emerging talent has a deep understanding of how to truly run and operate an imaging business. Because if they want to keep doing it, they got to be able to do it sustainably, quote right, and not get stuck in the churn of low budget stuff all the time, So I think that's the first step to answering that question. I think teaching craft is another thing. The importance of just education. I know that you guys have really gotten behind online education with the things that you guys are doing, and that's important, and making that accessible. I think the analogy that I've been using a lot recently has been, when I was growing up and I bought something online, I could go and see 5 choices, and each one of those choices I looked at would have been a good choice. Okay. Now I go online and I look at 87 different choices, and I have to buy 89 of them, right, to test them at home first, and then I got to return all of them but one, just to make sure that I bought the right one. So we have an issue right now in terms of availability of choice, and I think it's a really great opportunity for brands like us to educate and to be a source of authority, especially when it comes to things like storytelling and education and camera basics and fundamentals. Right? That's a really wonderful place for us to be now as a brand, as an industry. It's a great place for you guys to exist, because you guys partner with great brands. And so to reclaim some of that open water, so that emerging creatives can go to a trusted source, emerging creatives can go to a trusted brand to learn some of these things, so that they can take the right step forward, so that they can make continual growth movements in their careers. I think that's kind of how I look at your question, Johnny, is what can we do to help sustain this industry? It's education.
I think it's a very good point. I mean, it's glad you see that, but we've always tried with MZ to focus on the highest quality creators to make courses for the platform. And that has really become the differentiating factor, because there's a million free courses on anything out there, or even, like YouTube videos. The problem being finding those good sources. And I see an issue in general with the current, user-generated content is great. We're part of that in a way. Also as CineD users of professional gear. But there is, apart from the great people, there are people in our industry who are dabbling in it, I would say, who have managed to garner huge online audiences without ever having even earned $1 on a paid production, and then claiming to be professional filmmakers. And that's a problem, because they're professional, sometimes YouTubers, Instagram, which is fine, which is great, which is difficult in its job by its own. But when some of those people are starting to do workshops, trying to teach you as professional filmmakers, and that they've never been on an actual set and never had an actual client except for sponsored content, that's a problem, right? So that's the differentiation that's a very good point. I think a lot of people now, it has become aspirational to become one of those people. Like your me brand, I'm the greatest, and just presenting myself.
Right.
Before even learning to make those great images for somebody else.
Yeah, I think redefining what professional is very important for us as imaging manufacturers and providers. Someone who's professional, the working definition that we use is someone who gets paid to make images of themselves, places, or things. Okay, that's it. That's the definition of a professional, is that they can make a majority of their living making images of people, places, things. And how we segment that down and speak to those specific audiences, that's the secret sauce of any brand. And I think what we are seeing and what you're discussing is these independent creatives who are in and of themselves their own brands. They clearly are successful for a reason, and they clearly have something to share.
Of course. And
they clearly have something to teach. I think in trying to understand what it is that they have to teach, it's the responsibility of messaging. Like, they got to message it right, and then they also have to get good feedback. And sometimes that's where the failure point is they're not getting good feedback, and they're not getting good feedback about what it is that they're trying to teach. And so maybe they're getting pushed out as a filmmaker because that's the vocabulary that someone else had for them. And maybe that's why the things that they're teaching aren't necessarily resonating with seasoned on-set pros, or brands or other people, So I think it's like right fit. It's like we talk a lot about product market fit. In this case, the product is the person teaching something that they've clearly been successful at. And I think that market fit might be the issue there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. Should we wrap it up here? That we could talk on for hours, Victor.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. I think we have to repeat that at some point. So I hope you get another 3 weeks off in some time. It just needs to be 1 week, just come over. And he's spending his vacation with us. I mean, that means something, right?
It was easy. You guys are great, and I love what I get to do. I've been a product of this industry for my entire life, my career. I can look back and see the points in my life where someone put a camera in my hand and said, "Go make images." And so even when I'm on vacation, I'm talking photography, I'm talking filmmaking, and even when I'm on vacation, I'm thinking about what we can do at Fujifilm to reach an audience, So this conversation, strangely enough, is something that I'm excited about because it keeps me thinking about what creative things we can come up with to help get the message out, and what things I'm learning about our products too, because we are all users of the product. And if we're able to get our hands on the product for an extended amount of time, like I've been on the road here in Europe completely not even speaking any of the languages. It's wild, man. It makes you think completely differently. It's great.
Well, you made your passion your profession, right? Like we all did.
Yeah, I think
and
so.
I think that's a good message to young people. I mean, if you follow your heart, and the money will follow, but you just need to, learn something about the business as well. Don't undersell yourself.
Yeah, I think we listened to the same guy,
Scott Galloway.
Yeah, and I
we
think
talked about that yesterday.
Yeah, I think what he says, and I do believe this, is that find something you're good at that people are willing to pay you for.
Yep.
And if you get good at that, and you get really good at it, people will pay you for that, and then that'll leave room for a passion. I think he kind of made me think about, like, there are a lot of vocations that people do that they're good at, that they enjoy, they get paid at, and it allows them to have passions. Very rarely do we have an opportunity to do what you and I get to do, or and have the pleasure of doing both. But I think when I first started doing this stuff, I started off as a field sales rep for Nix Software. I was on the road for between 200 days and 240 days a year. I was going from trade show to show to show to show. And I remember I was 25 years old, and I hated it, actually. I hated it because I lived in San Diego at the time. And every time I made new friends in San Diego, I would go away for 2 weeks. And then I'd come back 2 weeks later, and I'd have to make new friends. Because by the time I'd come back from my trip, those new friends I'd made had either made other friends or had done other things, and there were no more things that I could get along with, right? And so that part of my life was really, really tough, and it had nothing to do with photography. At that time, I was still trying to do photos. I was still trying to get paid on the weekend because I was like, oh, this is just a short-term thing, And then I got hired at Mac Group, which they are a exclusive distributor of photographic video and photographic accessories in the U.S. And Jan Letterman was he's the owner and CEO of that company. He hired me and then started showing me kind of like what the other side of the business is. So, you're on the road for 220 days a year, but here are the other opportunities that are available to you. And he started opening up a lot of doors for me, right? But the only reason those doors got opened up to me was because I'd spent 5 years of my life on the road learning these things that I did not even know I needed to learn. Like, if you guys have ever worked a trade show, if you don't know what drayage is, like that, the first time you learn what drayage is, it's like, what is a CWT and why is it so expensive? And like, why do I have to get padding under the carpet? And like, these are weird little things and details that you don't ever have to know. And then here I am at Fujifilm going, get double padding. It's wild.
Yeah.
But all of that I didn't love, but I had to do it. I got good at it.
But it helped you find what you love.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks again for coming. Thank you, Johnny, for being here as well.
Thank you, Nina.
And thanks everybody for listening. You can get Focus Check anywhere where you can get your favorite podcasts, and on YouTube if you want to see our sweating faces. And see you again next week.
It's so hot in here.
It's so hot in here.
So hot in
and
here.
why am I wearing a suit? I don't know. Okay, see you next week. And until then.
Okay.